Your moral intuition has been taken away from you.
Our civilization isn't an emergency. We are descending down ever faster.
And your moral license to act has been denied to you.
We have to stop being willing to sacrifice the future of our people for our convenience.
We will not abandon you.
We're in the conflict, though. You're either serving your enemy or you're serving your side. Right? Those are the choices. It's not whether or not to be in the conflict anymore. We're way past that. That's a luxury we no longer have.
Where good people have to hide, evil flourishes.
We will re-give you that moral authorization.
If we don't have a revolution, in other words, we don't get a reformation, we're going to have a civil war.
All right, and welcome to Field Notes. This is the second episode with Noah Revoy. Welcome, Noah.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And as I already told you from last session with Brandon, these are intended to give you an insight into our instructors' background, their practical experience and expertise, and also tease a bit of what they'll contribute to the campaign that's coming up for you to participate in. And so with that, Noah, why don't you tell us a bit first about kind of your general background, what do you work on, and then we can go a bit deeper into how you got there.
So the part of my background I think is most relevant is that I grew up around an extended family that put a lot of effort into not just figuring out how to live better, but actually writing that down. And so for about 450 years, we wrote down what worked with marriage, what worked with child rearing. And my family had a preference for living on the edges of civilization. For a while, that was the edges of Europe in Frisia, and there was a time when Holland was quite wild. They lived there. They lived in the Russian frontier, and then eventually in both the Canadian frontier and a few of them down in the States and out in Saskatchewan. And that also meant that they had to understand self-rule and self-governance in a way that people that lived in the city didn't have to worry about. And they did this very intentionally because they were more concerned with their sovereignty than they were with becoming wealthy from living in the city. And so they had their own unique way of doing things. And back then, like most families, they were what we call an incorporate family. So there's multiple families working together as a single unit. And so I had that in my life, not directly, but I would hear the stories about how that worked and the benefits of it from my great-grandparents, since it only ended in the 1920s or so. And I had that wonderful experience growing up. They were also very well educated, considering they lived in the woods and they spoke several languages. And so they would debate about deep philosophical topics. And I grew up in this environment, and I then was trained to be a minister as well. And so that training helped me to speak in public. It helped me to be persuasive with people. I learned things like how to use gestures, for example, in conversation. But a big part of what I learned, I have now started to call the meta-father attitude. It is the attitude you have towards those that are in your care, that you're helping. And it's the attitude of what is in Greek called agape love. That's that principled love where you love people because of their humanity and because you are responsible for them and because they're your people. And mixing that with the ability to give people feedback on critical subjects that would help them to improve in ways that they were likely to listen to and wouldn't offend their egos. And so I had a really wonderful training growing up, an opportunity that most people would never get. And funny enough, I didn't think about doing this for a living. I live in Portugal now. When I first moved to Portugal, I worked as a business consultant, and I helped people modernize their businesses around the time the euro was first introduced. And that very quickly turned into, actually, you don't have business problems. You have personal problems, and they're bleeding over into your business. And that became such a big part of my work that eventually I decided that I was going to focus on helping people with their really painful personal problems in their own life, and that would be what I would dedicate myself to. And I liken it back to that meta-father perspective where my entire life, even before I had children, I felt like a father. I thought like a father. And it was both natural to me and cultivated within me. And what I'm doing today, my work today, is to be the meta father or the voice of the meta father in public, and to encourage people to adopt that within themselves and to get to the point of maturity and agency where they can father themselves. And that's ideally a society that is capable of fathering themselves is a society capable of sustaining sovereignty and resisting tyranny.
Right. Yeah, I have a wonderful father as well, and yet sometimes I felt that by virtue of being in a city environment and our family not really having that frontier lifestyle in our at least recent past, it puts you at a disadvantage for understanding the limits of things, I feel like. I think part of it is also, of course, going through 12 years of schooling and then essentially not having practiced the skill of self-direction when it comes to how to schedule your time, how to organize your tasks, how to accomplish them, how to work with others, how to choose what to focus on and what to kind of let fall by the wayside. So I think this is something that lots of people struggle with, not just in terms of the father not offering them a full range of competence and kind of self-governance or self-direction, but also that the cultural and societal institutions that they go through furthermore rob them of a hope of actually exercising those. So I like that you're talking about the meta father as a kind of role that people can inhabit. It's not just something that they are reliant on an external party to provide, although that can, of course, radically advance their ability to exercise themselves. But it is something that's accessible to everybody if only we choose to adopt it. So I think this is one of those things that is very important for people to realize that the solutions are actually quite within your grasp, but you have to know that they are there and you have to have enough gumption to adopt them and then to simply exercise them rather than stay mired in complexity, as I was for many, many years, trying to figure out how the world works. And only once I felt I had a sufficient understanding how the world works, actually do something with that understanding. Why don't you tell us a bit more about the kind of clients that you work with and what you do with them that actually helps them overcome these issues?
So I work mostly with clients. When I first started out, I worked with a lot of very, very young people, late teens, early 20s, because they didn't have direction. And that was the first kind of clients I got. They're also often more open to coaching at that age. But now I work mostly with more successful people who have been really successful in 2 or 3 areas of life. They're making a lot of money. They have to be to afford coaching. They're making a lot of money. They're popular, but they're having a hard time connecting with their wife or their husband, or they're concerned that their children aren't going to grow up in the same way they did. Maybe they grew up without money and now they have a lot of money and they're afraid of spoiling their children. And they wonder, how can I teach my children these ethics of hard work when they don't really have to do that because we have become financially intergenerationally wealthy. And so when I work with these people, what I do is I help them understand first of all, how to manage the emotions that come with this. And right now, one of the big things we're missing, I talk about underfathering a lot, but a lot of people were also undermothered. And again, this is not a criticism of people's mothers and fathers. It's that many mothers and fathers did not receive this instruction themselves, or they were shown it, but not explained how to repeat it again to the next generation. And so it's the job normally of the mother to teach a child before they're 7 how to regulate their emotions. And so many people don't have that. And they find that emotions are overwhelming for them. And so they pack them down into this little corner in their stomach where they feel a pain, little stomach ache from it. And they keep it there. And that means that they're blind to all the signals that emotions give you. Emotions give you signals in the same way that your 5 senses do, that there is something directionally to pay attention to. And so I teach you how to interpret the signals that are coming from your emotions, how to choose the right actions based on those emotions. So, if you're angry, what is the correct response to that? What is the reciprocal and healthy response to anger? And it depends what the cause of the anger is. But once you know that, you can respond. Now you can let the emotion go and they don't collect and they don't fester. You want the emotions to flow through you and leave. And I teach people how to do that, every step of that process. And I practice it with them. And, most people have heard of the big 5, and one of those parts is neuroticism. And a lot of my clients are quite high in neuroticism. And then after they work with me, they get a test for neuroticism again. And now they're in the middle, which is a healthy place to be. Too low, it could be a problem, but healthy is in the middle. And the difference means your whole life is better. You're no longer wasting a tremendous amount of energy worrying all the time, did I do the right thing? You now have this confidence in yourself that you did. And then once you have your emotions well in hand, you start to work on your thought processes. And you have to get the emotions first because emotions can easily overwhelm thought. And once you have them in order, now you get your thought processes in order, which means most of the things we do every day, we don't think about them. We just do them. So your morning routine, getting ready for work or driving to work, you just get in the car and 10 minutes later, 15 minutes, an hour later, you're at work. You didn't think about it a lot. We do that with everything. And for some things that works really well. If it's, making a meal you've made 100 times, you don't need to think about it. But it works well until it doesn't. And that's when you have a problem. The way that you've maintained your relationship with your small child is no longer working as they hit puberty. And all of a sudden, that sweet, innocent child that loved you and that got along with you so well is fighting and screaming and yelling and saying, you hate me, or I hate you, or whatever it is. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm doing exactly what I always did. Why is this changed? It's because the needs of the relationship have changed, but you haven't updated the programs, the scripts in your mind that help you to manage that relationship. And so what I teach people how to do is to constantly be able to evaluate and update those scripts so that they're able to change with the changing needs and responsibilities of their life, whether that's in their marriage, in their parenting, in their career, or even in their own self-management. There's a lot different being a 20-year-old man from a 40-year-old man. I'm 46 now, and I have to approach life differently, not just because of my responsibilities, but age brings with it certain limitations, and you have to think within those limitations and operate within them. And so I help people to continue to adapt and adjust to the situation they're in. And really, most of the time when we're stuck in life, it's not because we can't, it's because we haven't made some, in hindsight, once we figure it out, obvious adjustment. And I help people go through a process so they can find those on their own. My goal in coaching is not to coach people forever. It's to teach people the systems they need so they don't need coaching anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think there is a kind of person that thinks of emotional regulation as something, I don't need that because I'm stoic and I'm capable and everything in my life is going forward and I'm on an upward trajectory. I think a lot of the time those people don't recognize that actually if your emotions aren't giving you an issue, then you're probably not pushing hard enough, or you're actually getting sabotaged without your knowledge because you're not paying attention to them when they could give you information that you would be doing well to heed. So I think to those people,
you miss out on a huge part of life. That's like saying, maybe I don't like the taste of healthy food, so I wish I couldn't taste flavors anymore. Imagine that. I can't taste flavors anymore, so I will just eat what's in front of me. Not being able to feel emotions or having them so suppressed that they, quote unquote, don't bother you is like being colorblind. Like you can get through life, I guess, but are you really alive? Is that even really living? And it's not only that, but the emotions give you important signals and they help you connect with other people, because when you're having emotions, you can now understand other people's emotions better. And, this is especially important for people who are somewhat neurodivergent, and they often find it difficult to understand other people's emotions or even their own. And so learning it, sometimes they have to learn it like a science rather than intuit it like other people do. And once they do that, they can actually become better at it than other people because they understand all the reasons why and what's happening and all the signs. And they can then read people almost like a book. And that's a huge help in connecting with other people and having those wholesome and really satisfying relationships.
I very much relate to that. I think that's one of the things that I worked very hard to rectify. I have been consistently by my mother, especially, and the women in my life, called that I withhold my internal world from them and they have to kind of draw it out of me. I don't think that's only a kind of general tendency, but it's also a strategy or a sense of responsibility of not wanting to overburden the people around me with things that are constantly changing anyway inside me, right? But having spent a lot of time understanding emotions and regulating them, and now I benefit a lot from that when a emotionally challenging situation comes up with my girlfriend or even friends or collaborators. So can you go into a bit of your own experience with emotional regulation, especially as it goes back to kind of your childhood experience and the challenges that you faced with, let's say, the gang problems or the problem of violence that was around you?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, and a lot of people don't realize how violent Canada or certain parts of Canada were back in the 80s and 90s. So I grew up in Ontario, and the city I grew up in had a lot more crime even than was officially registered. Whoever keeps the statistics gets to decide how much crime there is. But when you're there and you're feeling it, it's a different situation. And the school that I went to was constantly plagued with bullying and fights and kids from bigger schools coming there and starting fights. And I was told to be a good Christian and not to fight back and turn the other cheek. And I fortunately was well constructed that I didn't end up getting too badly hurt doing that. But other kids got their teeth knocked out because they turned the other cheek. And there came a point where I decided that this was not feasible. This is not a viable method. I kept being told to be a sheep, and I decided I'd rather be a sheepdog. And when it first started, I got only a couple of kids to agree with me. And I said, if we stand together, we're stronger than a bully. Even if he's 2 or 3 or 4 years older than us and twice our size, if there's 3 or 4 of us, we're okay. And so we started to do that. We started to organize together. And what happened was other kids would come to us and say, hey, this kid's bullying me. And I would say, oh, that's terrible. You should really do something about it. And they would want us to do something about it. And we said, okay, here's the deal. I ended up with a little constitution. We had a set of rules on it. And basically, we didn't start fights. If anyone in the group started a fight, they were out of the group. Now we consider them a bully. So they're a valid target. You had to follow instructions and all of these other things. And then you could sign it at the bottom. If you sign it at the bottom, it means that when there's a fight and you hear, I bought the kids' whistles, when you hear the whistle, you come to wherever the whistle is and you help out in the fight.
The NATO of
And
bullies.
you fight the bullies. We got about 50 kids, and around 15 or 20 stopped fighting, because when 20 kids run up on you, and we're talking like just preteens roughly, when 20 kids run up on you and they're yelling and screaming at you, even if you are a 17 or 18-year-old bully, and we're talking not your just average bullies. A lot of these kids had criminal records. They had done pretty terrible things, and we'd run up on them. There's just enough of us that there's a need to be a fight. It completely prevents the need for violence altogether. And so by the time I left that school, there was a good system running where the kids would take turns every other day being on guard duty, and there was almost no violence in the school at all. And that was a huge change from a couple years before. And what it taught me, I often say in school, I didn't learn anything from the curriculum. Everything I learned was in recess, and it was all about fighting and starting gangs. What I learned was that you cannot rely on the system to protect you, and you can't trust the bad guy to leave you alone. What you have to do is you have to be sufficiently dangerous, and most of us, that means we have to be networked, because we can't be that dangerous on our own. We have to be sufficiently dangerous that there isn't any violence. And that the more we're able to do that and the more we're able to network, the less the violence is likely to happen. And it's disorganization that leads to violence, not the willingness to use violence in your own defense. And that was a real revelation to me. I mean, Canada's the nice country. And so there's a lot of anti-violence rhetoric. And I remember as I was leaving school, they started bringing in these zero tolerance policies. And I remember getting called into the principal's office, because one of the last times we actually had to fight was because basically the bullies started to figure out they had to get together too. And 5 kids came and 5 kids went to the hospital. And so I got called into the principal's office, and he says to me, yeah, we have a zero tolerance policy. Like he'd been looking the other way until then. He says, I can't, it's out of my hands now. Someone's going to come from the school board and you're going to get suspended. And I said, I don't think me being suspended is probably a good idea, because then you won't know where I am. And I would have suspended some of the other organizers too. I said, you won't know where I am, but I'll still know where your cars are. And I realized as long as the teachers were on the side of law and order and were helping us to keep the peace, they were our friends. And as soon as they turned against us and they made it impossible for us to fulfill our responsibility to take care of ourselves, then they were a legitimate target too. And that actually ended it. After that, I was told to leave the office, and no one contacted me again about my suspension. So the lessons I learned in school really shaped the kind of man that I am today. I do what needs to be done. And if somehow that causes causes a problem, I will sort it out afterwards. And that's really the idea of high agency, is you need to take your responsibilities and do them and deal with the consequences after.
Right. Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of one of the core things I wish to press upon the people and to train people in, which is to actually do your own accounting of what the good and the bad is and how to discern the difference and to act on that information rather than merely render it up to Caesar or God. I think a lot of the time, especially the people who consider themselves religious, neglect to remember that they are actually an instrument of God and that they can be his hand. But of course, the challenge is always having that moral certainty and then also dealing with the consequences that can befall you when you take matters into your own hands. So I think this is the difference between a vigilante and, let's say, a lawful man. You understand the law, you respect the law, you make yourself an instrument of it, but you don't call yourself the final arbiter of it, right? Like that would be what the vigilante would do. And it is always a challenge to know the difference. So I think this is one of the things that natural law and the study of it makes you able to do, to know where your limits are and in what cases it would be better to leave decisions up to the societal institutions or the groups that you are a part of.
Yeah, and as the U.S. Founding Fathers said, that the power actually resides in the hands of the people, and they merely delegate it to the state until such time as they need to take it back. And again, you can't by yourself take that back. That needs to be the people. So it needs to be a significant body of men to take it back. But that is the setup of Western government, is that the people have the power and they delegate it as necessary to the government for essentially to keep the peace between us and to protect us from external threats. And that means it's our job as well to hold the powers that be responsible for doing their job.
Yes.
Since it's still our responsibility at the end of the day.
Yeah, and this is something that you learn when you study law in more detail, that even the notion of a jury essentially is an extension of this idea of this popular sovereignty, that 12 people are, or whatever many people are called together to then use the collective sovereignty to deprive the individual of the aspect of their sovereignty that they themselves essentially rendered no longer theirs by virtue of the actions that they took. So it is a very deeply rooted notion and not just an idea. I think a lot of the time when people look at the landscape of thought or of conversation, they make the mistake of only looking at the ideas that are present there. But it's actually oftentimes more important what the behaviors, the operational capacities are that the people that show up in the conversational sphere are capable of doing. And I think this is something that I want to invite people to do more of, which is to take an account, use your mind and your language to discern and to communicate right from wrong, and then to act on that and to take the one step beyond the accusation or the call out. A lot of the time people let it be when an infraction happens that, okay, I saw it and I've told other people about it, but what have you done to make it less likely or maybe even impossible for that person to do this thing again? And that can go as far as giving them social consequences, bring their reputation into question, whatever means are at your disposal to actually exercise ownership over the community and the society that you're a part of, rather than staying a mere political consumer that the institutions are serving supposedly. And insofar as you leave the capacity of giving consequences for bad actions up to state institutions, that is the exact measure with which you are then yourself dependent on them to do so for the well-being of your community. So men, step up and take some responsibility for the communities and the principles by which your communities operate, and be serious about actually bettering them.
Yeah, we delegate power to the government, but we retain the responsibility. And I think it's hard for people to understand that. Most people's calculation is, what's the minimum I can do to still be a good guy? And they're calculating based on minimums. And that's okay for children. But once you become an adult, you don't ask, what's the minimum I can do to not get in trouble or to be a good guy. We want to start thinking about, what is the right thing to do? How much more can I do for this to make this successful? And that's where you get into that meta-father thinking. A good father doesn't do the bare minimum so his kids don't die before they're 18 and then kick them out the door. He wants to make sure his children have the best advantages possible. And we want to do that with our communities. We want to make sure our community is the best that we possibly can, given our own limitations and our own resources. What can we do?
Yeah. And I guess before we finish off, why don't you tell us a bit about what your plan is for the topic and the training you're going to give the people at Modern Minutemen, the crew campaign?
So there's lots of people that talk about preparing for a without rule of law situation, and it's usually, bullets, beans, beef, and Band-Aids. That's what it is, the 4 Bs. And so it's all about the tactical preparation for the moments after without rule of law. It doesn't really go into much depth. And what I noticed about that is that no one's working on a plan to, you've gone to without rule of law. How do you get back to with rule of law later on? How do you restore it? And we always assume that someone is going to save us. Someone's going to come from the outside and save us and restore things. And sometimes that happens. And depending on how big the chaos is, maybe it doesn't happen. How do we restore it? And there is a process to do that. We created law and order out of wilderness to begin with. So there is a way to do it, but how do we make it a lot easier in modern times? And so I'm going to be talking about strategy for restoring sovereignty and rule of law in a breakdown scenario. And I go through what you have to do in preparation and what you're going to then have to, for example, give thought to so that if there is a breakdown, you and your group are seen as thought leaders and active leaders in your community. As I said, most people wait for someone to tell them what to do. So be the someone that tells everybody what to do. This is the rules. This is what we're going to do. And get that laid out quickly. Then it's unlikely that some set of rules that aren't favorable to you will get imposed instead. And the other thing is that the more communities, not just yours, but around you do this, the easier it will be to create that kind of common law where you can cooperate with your neighboring communities. And that's really where we get the stability, is not because our community is okay, but because all of our communities across an area are okay and we're able to stabilize each other. And the way to restore that, the physical ways, lots of people are talking about that. How to get the power back online, how to get food production going. I'm going to talk about how to do the legal, governmental, and institutional part of that process, which nobody's talking about.
Right. And the good thing, of course, about that is also that that is the same thing, or it also advances your own status in the community. It kind of already, without the scenario actually coming to pass, has advantages. So it's not just a thing that is oh no, if the scenario hits, what will we do? But it is actually, this is the kind of thinking that men do, that fathers do, that people do who have actually things at stake, rather than those that stay stuck in their video games. It's when you know that you have something that you actually care about and that it's up to you, because you are the one that cares most about it, to secure its well-being, its existence, and its defense. And I think, again, in keeping with the theme of what I talked earlier about with political power and your ability to exercise it rather than merely consume it, you have to be able to impose costs upon the people that would harm you. And in order for that, you need to be capable. And that doesn't only look like physical readiness, that is important. It doesn't only look like mental preparedness, that's also important, but it also looks like social preparedness and, essentially violent preparedness. Being able to impress upon the people around you that you are a reliable person, have them trust your justice-mindedness, perhaps, and to seek you out when it comes to important decisions or when they themselves feel unsafe. So looking forward to having you tell and instruct our participants in that. And that is it for today with Field Notes, episode 2 with Noah Revoy. And I hope to see you in the campaign.
Looking forward to it.
Your moral intuition has been taken away from you.
Our civilization isn't an emergency. We are descending down ever faster.
And your moral license to act has been denied to you.
We have to stop being willing to sacrifice the future of our people for our convenience.
We will not abandon you.
We're in the conflict, though. You're either serving your enemy or you're serving your side. Right? Those are the choices. It's not whether or not to be in the conflict anymore. We're way past that. That's a luxury we no longer have.
Where good people have to hide, evil flourishes.
We will re-give you that moral authorization.
If we don't have a revolution, in other words, we don't get a reformation, we're going to have a civil war.